Alright, hey, what's good, guys? Woo! So, dude, this is going to be a big one. 21 pages today, so we're going to do quite a bit. Because I'd rather do more breaks and not wipe myself out, we're going to do, instead of 5 pages per break, we're going to do 3. And we're going to stretch it out, because 21 is about 5. This album is 6 songs. I wanted to find something very thematically appropriate to the name of the chapter tonight, which is called Cleaning Up Operations. So I wanted something that was going to convey an air of tragedy. And this band is called Flesh Temple, which is what the Zealots made of the temple in Josephus's account. So I thought it was thematically appropriate. And the album is called Lamentations, and that's what I went in searching for. I said, doom metal album Lamentations. And this is what popped up. And I gave it a little bit of a hearing, and I said, okay, I like the tone. That was called Intro. All right. And so, by the way, before we get started, in fact, I don't even want to look at that until we get started. I just want to let people know. I did a short live video about it on Instagram. If you've seen that and you came to Instagram and you've found this episode in question, thank you for popping in and giving me a fair hearing. All right, so when the fireworks were going off tonight, as usual, there must have been some sort of incident, because there was a tremendous amount of alarm going on, right? Like, at first I thought it was simple, like, celebratory, or maybe, okay, probably 1 or 2 fires from small accidents. But everything started compounding, right? Like, I would hear this absurd amount of emergency response. And hearing all the amalgam of sirens making their way towards what my father's map calculations, if they are correct, and I think they are, because it's part of how he hunts when he hunted more, is that it's over by the country club or something like that. So anyway, the psychic weather really kind of shifted when the sirens were going off like that, right? And so, to me, that's a little bit of like an augury, kind of like an omen, right? Like, just there was an air of ill omen over the fireworks in my area, or at least in my awareness field, perhaps. Things have calmed down. The signal has passed, if you will, right? So it's not persistent psychic weather, but because I am sensitive, it sticks with me a little bit. Just because also I have to wrangle the analytical, intellectual part of my mind that wants to have Heimdall, like, stretch out awareness and make sure that it isn't, the Draugr on the march, if you will. So, needless to say, I've secured a few things outside, and I've got a small metal bat by my door, along with a gift of a hand-drawn picture of a Mjolnir that says it's my Mjolnir with my first name on it. That was it was given to me by the boss at the battery warehouse. Like, I maybe have shown it before. Let me show it again. It's pretty fucking cool. The boss is like, he's like this Mexican American guy. He's a bit terrified of getting deported. And I hope that I hope he doesn't. He's like a biker dude. He's a fucking cool dude. You know, he definitely called me like, it's fucking great shit. And so he drew this for me. He likes to draw things he can draw fairly well, like I haven't seen him do so much drawing that I would say that's a complete piece you would put in a comic book, but like you could put that into a scene of a stylized comic that way, you know, just you can do a whole thing with that kind of talent. But anyway, he made this for me, and on my last day at that particular temp assignment, he said I could take it. So I just got that there for now because I've been too lazy to pick a spot on the wall that I wanted to hang it up. But it's over by the threshold of the door, so it can operate as a protective bind. It's simple magic. It's knowing a gift when you see it. Okay, let's get into the book. Cleaning up operations. To Judea, a new legate had been sent, Lucilius Bessus, who took over the command from Zerilath Vitilianus. He first secured the submission of the fortress at Herodium, together with its defenders, then concentrating all available troops, hitherto very widely dispersed, and including the 10th Legion, he determined to march against Machaerus. It was absolutely necessary to destroy this fortress, for fear that its strength might tempt large numbers to revolt, since the character of the terrain might well fill its defenders with confident hopes of survival and its assailants with despondency and fear. Now, remember what AI said, right? AI said that these zealots were honored by the people in 1947 who established Israel and are considered national heroes. And this is why people are bonkers about a very important keystone goal is the dark sorcery of the psychic connection to this temple that they want to build. I don't know if they're trying to rebuild the temple as written by Josephus. I don't know if it's by some other standard, or is it perhaps some new dark sorcery to open a new portal. But what we know is that is there for opening portals to talk to their god, which, if you don't understand the mythos of what's going on with this lineage of rabbis with this agenda, look, I get it. It's kind of silly to act like this crazy mythos that they have with dark and light. Like, it's just their mythology, right? I'll break this down in an even simpler manner, right? This mythology is legitimately connected to things that seem to have absolute historical merit, with cataclysmic events, and various instances of what seems like mass revolts of various sorts that were part of the destruction of things, you know? Not all the shit in Rome was broken because they got sacked by outside vandals and shit. It was inner crime in the, as well as Roman citizens down the line with Rome's relationship to Israel started emulating the Zealots because they were Rome was just like, Jewish culture's so great for us, right? At that time, at that context. Dude, like, Israel's behavior is that of a psychopath in the way that they sell the trust me routine. The whole put on this fucking shit-eating grin and play and appeal to every Jew you've ever loved, and to understand that we do this for every Jew you ever loved, and everything else, right? And then there's this whole, world of pity and also amazing character and talent. And look at this guy who made all these amazing films. Look at this guy who came up with all this amazing science, and so on and so forth. And nobody's trying to take that away from fucking anybody, right? But we have to have another conversation about bloodlines that is different than the race conversation. And that conversation still doesn't hold up, because you can't condemn somebody by the deeds of their parents. However, there is a projection of the parents' shortcomings on the child. I'm very conscious of mine. I've still got more of those things to overcome from the cycles, right? If you want to understand the absolute pain of what it takes to free yourself from the lie of the family curse, it's not that the family curse is a lie, but the lie of what makes the curse manifest, right? And it's through the blind spot of the parents, right? And that movie is an example of a hypocrite of his faith, raising his kids in a recklessly hands-off manner while acting like their coach instead of their father, forcing them to compete with each other, and he's playing fucking Jehovah on his family and everything, right? And the whole fucking family, huge, like a bazillion kids, and the mother's there too, and she's playing. You've got Jehovah, and she's playing Virgin Mary, right? Father's always fucking right, and everything else, and right? That movie cuts really. If you haven't seen that movie, go watch that movie. It's a good movie, right? It's not all terrible. It gets worse and worse as it goes, but it's the juxtaposition, because the movie is it's funny in the beginning, right? It's because it's capturing the emotional beats of the family appropriately as these things happen, right? But there's healing in the end. There's healing because it's showing such a deep suppression of doing incredible self-harm to get the approval of your highest authority. As Father, you are responsible for representing Jehovah responsibly, especially if you need the social stature of the others. That movie teaches you something, right? And this is why I try to tell people, like, don't take Gnosticism and don't focus on it for too long if you still need to check out a lot more mythoses out there and the metaphysics behind how they work, just to make sure you're stepping in the right direction for you, because it can be very enticing, but you can also be missing something. Don't just jump to your heart's delight. I appeal to the Virgo in your energy, whether it's your Virgo energy or somebody that you trust with Virgo energy that helps you. That'll keep you going, which is ironic with the Virgin Mary situation, but it's, the Virgin is the Virgin Mary is not supposed to be the Virgin Mary. She's supposed to be like Frigga, the eternally pregnant one, right? Because the Virgin Mary, who gives birth to Jesus, she's got an extraordinarily small role to play in the story as one of the few women that are in the top of the mythos, right? So she's like the various cosmic mothers that are eternally pregnant from the sky gods, not the earth gods. There's earth gods and the earth goddess, who is eternally pregnant, right? And then there's the sky goddesses that are eternally pregnant, right? And that would be Frigga. So, the defended area is itself a rocky hill rising to an immense height, and for that very reason it is also impregnable, and nature has found means to make it unapproachable too. For it is trenched on every side with ravines too deep for their bottoms to be seen, difficult to cross and quite impossible to fill in. The one which shuts it in on the west stretches 7 miles, ending at the Dead Sea. Somewhere in this region, the soaring peak of Machaerus itself towers aloft. The ravines to the north and south are considerably smaller, but just as serious an obstacle to an attacker. That to the east is found to be at least 150 deep, and it extends as far as a mountain situated opposite Machaerus. Realizing that the site had many natural advantages, the Jewish king Alexander had been the first to build a fortress there, only to be demolished by Gabinius in his war against Aristobulus. When Herod came to the throne, he decided that no place would be better repay attention and strongest fortification, especially in view of the proximity of Arabia. Gotcha. So they were going to have that as a very, they were going to pump the economy into that city, under absolute Roman rule. And probably have a lot more soldiers there because of what the future with Arabia may look like, which I am not 100% sure what was going on exactly outside of the Roman Empire in Arabia at this exact time. Fort's situation was most opportune, commanding as it did a view of Arab territory, so he surrounded a large area with walls and towers and founded a city there, from which an ascent led up to the ridge itself. Not content with that, he built a wall round the very summit and erected towers at the corners, each 90 feet high. In the middle of this enclosure, he built a palace, breathtaking in the size and beauty of the various rooms, and at carefully chosen spots, he constructed a numbers of tanks to receive rainwater and maintain a constant supply. He might well have been competing with nature in the hope that the impregnability the place had received from her might be outdone by his own artificial defenses. He further provided an ample store of weapons and engines and managed to think of everything that could enable the occupants to snap their fingers at the longest siege. Hold on one second. I want to make sure. Yeah, okay, good. There grew in the place a plant of rue of an astounding size. It was every bit as tall and stout as a fig tree. And by the way, I'm looking, the whole page should be on screen. Let me see how chat is doing. There was just Bane Bear. Thanks for popping in. And anybody else lurking about, please come say hello. I got nobody tonight. Nobody live. That's okay. There's a bunch of other professional broadcasts with a much more live, conducive show. You know, a lot more fun. And a lot more current events involved. Direct current relevance in a local fashion, right? Let me see here. Okay, we're good. It was popularly believed to have been there since Herod's time, and it might well have lived much longer if it had escaped the axes of the Jewish settlers. In the ravine that protects the tower on the north is a place called Baris, where grows a root of the same name. This is flame-colored, and at dusk it sends out brilliant flashes so that those who came near in the hope of plucking it cannot take hold of it, as it sips away and will not stay still until it is drenched with a woman's urine or menstrual blood. Even then, to touch it means certain death, unless one happens to have brought an exactly similar root dangling from the wrist. It can also be secured another way without risk, thus they dig right around it. What the hell? So as to leave the smallest possible piece of root in the ground. Okay, you put a circle around it. Then they tie a dog to it, and when he springs forward to follow the man who tied him, it is easily pulled up, but the dog dies instantly. A substitute for the person who is going to remove the plant, for no danger remains for those who subsequently handle it. Gotcha. Okay, so to remove the root of the tree will kill you. All right, so they're saying they have to do this whole thing, right? He's making this claim that they can't just have the excavator come in and pull it out. It'll kill the driver of the excavator, right? If I was the guy in the excavator, I'm the one handling the tool, right? So the tool is directly connected to my energy field at that time as it is obeying my will. It is an instrument of my power and my talent. And so it rips up the root and I die. So what I would do is that I would put up my dog in tribute to pull it out. And the dog dies. And then we handle the dog as I guess a burnt sacrifice or something, right? This is all part of them breaking down, I guess, all of these sacred places, right? It's the whole, like, you're having your pagan practices revoked for no other reason than their goddamn fucking society fell apart and was tied directly to how these altars were being treated, right? I mean, they were blind to their own fucking sins as their Torah understood it. There was no Old Testament back then, right? It was just the Torah, and then we don't know what scrolls may have been out there that were in the hands of the Melchizedek. Melchizedek's going to have the official fucking scrolls, because that's the big reason why he's the Melchizedek, as people of the book. Right? They're scriptures. Which, if this Melchizedek is a real fucking person, which it probably is, he probably knows root language and thus is fluent in Greek by the merit of being one of the high rabbis, polluting the Hyperborean signal. Or perhaps honoring the Hyperborean signal, and we're dealing with yet still evil fucking heads of the bloodline that can't get their shit together with what Odinma has asked for. I have now specifically asked some of my Bach Saga friends what they got on Zadok and the Zadokites. Despite the greatness of the danger, it has one virtue that makes it sought after. For the so-called devils, in reality the spirits of evildoers that enter the living and killing them if they are not rescued, are quickly cast out by this plant if it so much as touches the possessed. Here, too, flow springs of hot water, differing widely in flavor, as some are bitter, others very sweet indeed, right? And what's kind of interesting about this lore, if it's true, or at least the fact that that is the lore of the plant, is it's like the Garden of Eden, right? It's just like, but it's not like having the fruit, it's tearing the tree from its roots that kills you. Because they explain that you can kind of chop around it and stuff, but you have to leave that last part of the root out, right? So that's what makes that story very interesting to me. So there are also many fountains of cold water, and these do not all issue from wells on low ground in a row. The truth is more surprising, for there is a cave to be seen nearby, not hollowed out to any great depth, and sheltered by rock that juts out. Above this protrude, as it were, two breasts a little way apart, sending out water, in one case icy, in the other boiling hot. Oh, you know what? That's actually very interesting, because, as you know, I didn't read ahead on this, because not the next song, but the song after when we take our break is called ice. Anyway, when mixed, these furnish a most pleasant bath, beneficial in many sicknesses and giving special relief to tired muscles. The region also contains sulfur and alum mines. That's very interesting that you can't you can't use this tree for healing without a sacrifice. You have to be willing to die, or you do the thing with the dog. Does it have to be a dog? What if I had a tiger? What if I wrapped it around a tiger and then dangled a piece of fucking, I just dangled a fresh kill in front of him. This is a wild tiger. Doesn't want to be fucking tied down. Might fucking pull it out by accident. There's gonna have to be like a chain, right? There's gonna be a chain, so we can't fucking just gnaw through it, because it's a cat. Cats are smart, all right? So anyway. Can I point the laser, and then the tiger will chase the laser, and that's what'll pull the root out and kill the poor fucking tiger? Like, not worth the price, man. Not worth the price. It's bad enough. I mean, like, if you could do it with a cow, do it with an animal that I would eat. Don't do it with a fucking dog. We'll be like, we're gonna have steak tonight. We can send this one off to the other side, and its spirit will return in the next cycle. Yada yada yada, right? And these are a minimum aspect for those of us that whatever aspect of our physiology is going on, we need to take in a certain amount of animal meat and accept that we're not that happy about what happens to the animal, and we're trying to stop the way that it happens from happening the way that it does, which is terrible. And I don't want to eat meat that was treated poorly as a living being its entire life before it came to my plate. This is one of the reasons why I recommend people watch the movie Branded and then rethink what it means to be eating meat, right? And the slaughtering of cattle. This movie is coming from a largely Russian perspective. And I don't know if it's trying to be a veganism thing, but it's definitely trying to be an anti-obesism thing. And there's a big burger corporation that has a massive supply for cattle slaughter, but they also are making it the greasiest, fattest fucking of burgers, and just making it juicy and putting the kid in an addiction. And the movie shows you the demons behind this. It's a fucking amazing film. Go watch Branded 2012 at some point, and then ask yourself about your relationship with marketing. Now that it's after this kind of awakening situation we've gone through, you would actually know this stuff already, right? So going into it, you'll appreciate a film that sees it the way that you already see it. And it's always awesome when you come across that, because you'll learn something that takes your game to the next level. Watch the movie. It's got a good message. After viewing the position from various angles, Bessus decided to approach by filling in the ravine to the east. He promptly set to work endeavoring to raise the platform with the utmost speed and thereby making the siege easy. The Jews trapped inside separated themselves. Make the siege easy. The Jews trapped... What? Okay, there's a doubling error here. That's weird. That's not a glitch. That's an error on the page from the original print. The Jews trapped inside separated themselves from the Gentiles. These they considered a useless mob and forced to stay in the town below to face the first onslaught. You heard that? Did you hear that? That's Talmudic attitude. That's Talmudic attitude. Talmudic attitude is people that are committed to the dark sorcery of the Draco, Sumerian, Syrians, Setians, the whole rogues gallery of invaders, right? While they themselves seized and held fortress above, both because of the strength of its defenses and to ensure their own safety, they felt certain they could win, pardon by surrendering the place to the Romans. First, however, they wanted to test their prospects of escaping a siege, so they made vigorous sorties every day and grappled with all they encountered at heavy costs to both sides. On every occasion, it was the circumstances of the moment that decided the issue in favor of one side or the other. Of the Jews, if they caught the Romans off their guard; of the men on the platforms, if they had seen the attack coming and were lined up to meet it. However, it was not this skirmishing that was to terminate the siege. A fortuitous and astonishing occurrence forced the Jews to surrender the fortress. Among the besieged was a young man, bold in enterprise and energetic in action, named Eleazar. He had been prominent in the sorties, inciting the majority of the defenders to issue forth and interrupt the building of the platforms, and in the encounters doing a great deal of damage to the Romans. For those who dared to sally out with what? Where we go? These are forthwith when the well, Eleazar employed the most standoff, suffered the most. How did I lose my place here? I am so confused, guys. I'm so sorry. This is the last page before the first break. Eleazar had prominent in the sorties, inciting majority defense. Okay, damaged. One day, last withdrawal. One day when the battle had been broken off and both sides had retired, he confidently, supposing that none of the enemy would start furthering fighting now, stayed outside the gates, talking to the defenders on the wall, and with no thought for anyone else. A soldier from the Roman camp, an Egyptian named Rufus, saw his chance and performed a breathtaking feat. He made a sudden rush, picked the man up, armor and all, and before the spectators on the wall could recover from their astonishment, carried him off to the Roman camp. The commander ordered him to be stripped, taken where he would be most clearly seen by the watchers in the town, and flogged with whips. The Jews were terribly distressed by the young man's agony, and the whole town burst into tears, showing most unusual concern for one unfortunate individual. Seeing this, Bessus proceeded to play a trick on the enemy, wishing to aggravate their grief and to induce them in return for the man's life to surrender the fortress, not for his hope disappointed. He ordered a cross to be set up as if he would crucify Eleazar forthwith. When the defenders saw this, they were filled with the greater distress, and their shrieks were deafening as they cried out that they could not endure the horror of it. Then Eleazar implored them not to stand by while he suffered the most pitiable of deaths, but to save their own lives by submitting to the might and fortune of Rome, by which all others had been crushed. Okay, we're going to save it right here at the top of 377. And this song by Flesh Temple on Lamentations is called Tears. All right, that mix, like, they've that fade dropped there's still 3 seconds left on that track. That fade needed to last 2 more seconds, at least 2.5 maybe. All right. So, I want to give everybody some notice here, right? My buddy Raven Kiefer was unsubbed during a period of time where he wasn't on top of my content, right? So, anybody that you're following that you know is controversial, and especially if they don't have a good marketing network like I do. Like, well, I mean, like I don't. I don't have a good marketing network like that. I just kind of do a copy paste blast thing because I'm not ready to invest in certain things just yet, because the internet is secondary to operating in the Materium, and that keeps me off of AI's bullshit, augmented reality's infestation and confusions, and keeping my actual embodiment needs first, right? So anyway, always double check on people you haven't checked in on in a while, right? I mean, like, with the amount of times I go live to complete a series, like when I'm doing these book readings, you should be getting a live notification from me about once a week at worst. Like, it's just like, I try to find, like, have I done one live this week? I really want to fucking do one, right? You know, I have to push through being tired and all sorts of things. Yeah, I picked because this is the cleaning up operations chapter at the pretty much the butt end of the Jewish War. I thought that Flesh Temple's Lamentations was an appropriate soundtrack for the story hour. Okay. Such an appeal was irresistible, and many inside the town pleaded on his behalf. By the way, you missed in the earlier part of this chapter, the first 3 pages, a description of a ritual process by which they had to rip out this tree, that the one who rips out the tree from its roots will die on the spot. So, because no human being wants to do it, they use a dog, and they do this whole ritual on the dog, and then they tie the dog to the root, and then make the dog run to pull the root out, and then the dog dies. It's a very fascinating ritual. You'll be interested in that. Anyway, such an appeal was irresistible, and many inside the town pleaded on his behalf, for he came of an eminent and very numerous family. So contrary to their nature, they yielded to pity, and hastily dispatched a delegation to discuss the surrender of the fortress, on the understanding that they should be free to go away, taking Eleazar with them. To this the Romans and their commander agreed. When the people in the town below learnt of the separate agreement researched by the Jews, they decided that their own best plan was to steal away in the night. But as soon as they opened the gates, those who had come to terms with Baucis' information, informed him of what was happening, perhaps grudging the others their lives, perhaps through fear that they themselves might be held responsible for their escape. The boldest of those who left the town succeeded in breaking through and getting clear. But of those left behind, the men were massacred, 1,700 of them, the women and children enslaved. Feeling that he must honor the agreement made with those who had surrendered the fortress Bassas, let them go and sent back Eleazar. And Raven, by the way, weren't you always a wrench? Weren't you always a wrench? So they did that to a wrench. You see? Like, that's crazy to me, right? You know, when you've got a huge list of dudes, right? It's just like, you can't, like, how, you know, like, this is not you, Raven. This is not you, Raven. This is nobody other than you ought to be telling this to yourself as wisdom, right? Memory, right? How many channels do you need to tap the well, and that you need to commit to absolute memory up here, perhaps written down in a couple of notes around, you know, your desk or something. That's an important detail. So, yeah, because, you know, nobody is gonna pull a fast one on me with Black Earth Productions, right? I listen to Black Earth Productions all the time on purpose, right? I go and I seek it out, and I re-listen to lessons on the channel over and over and over again, to help me process and dig through what Zerilath says, because you have to be capable of a very high and complex explanation of thought to understand the significance of what Zerilath is teaching in there, right? And you can't fault a man for explaining that he has to tell you you gotta be a part of the temple to understand certain things. Because I know some people that they get, you know, they complain about that when I show them one of his videos. And it's just like, yeah, yeah, he mentions that a whole lot. It's a 3-second statement instead of fucking, and now let me interrupt to sponsor myself, right? No, it's just like there's stuff that can't really be said outside of one-on-one to get more particular on the subject. He works very hard to comprehensively explain something in focused detail around a discussion, like the implications and the mechanics behind the occult meaning of the trapezoid in magic, particularly in Setian magic and satanic magic. How it's associated with the lockdown codes. How it's part of the corrupted pyramid. So anyway, having settled these problems, he made a rapid march to the forest of Jardis. For news had reached him that many who had earlier escaped from the sieges of Jerusalem and Machaerus had collected there, arriving at the spot and finding the information correct. He first encircled the whole area with his cavalry so that any Jews who tried to break through would find their flight cut off. Then he ordered the infantry to cut down the trees amongst which they were hiding. These measures compelled the Jews to attempt some heroic feat in the hope that by a supreme effort they might get clear. So rushing out en masse with loud hurrahs, they fell on the encircling enemy. They met with stubborn resistance, and as one side fought with the fury of despair and the other with the utmost pertinacity, the battle was very prolonged. But it ended very differently for the combatants, Roman casualties being no more than 12 killed and a handful wounded, whereas of the Jews not one survived the encounter. 3,000 in all, they perished to a man. Among them was their general, Judas son of Jairus, who, as stated, already commanded a unit at the siege of Jerusalem, and by making his way through some of the sewers, slipped unnoticed through the Roman lines. And Judas gets away. Come the fuck on, Josephus. Come the fuck on. Is he pulling our legs? These are the names. Right? This is the magic that you see that pops. It's just like they're weaving this tale about these 12 disciples, this whole narrative of Christ, and then these names are then, because all these dudes are like got the same fucking names running around, they kind of almost like gematria just kind of fucking pop up in this rebellion conflict. And this is the gaslighting that you get when you listen to what's his gremlin, Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro, when Jesus was a terrorist, effectively, right? You know, this is kind of what he's talking about. He's kind of like this, you know, Jesus is kind of like this weird, like, he's like in a scene, sorta, right? But then he goes and he flips the fucking tables like a zealot, right? Was Jesus a Zadokite? Was David a Zadokite? Solomon? Who was the Zadokite? Oops. It's at the bottom of the page already. About the same time, Caesar sent a message to Bassus and Liberius. It is. Maximus the Procurator. I like that name. It's kind of a cool name. Maximus the Procurator. Or Maximus Procuratorus. Something like that. That would be a cool Roman character in a thing. That's a Roman character for a thing. Instructing them to sell all Jewish territory. He founded no city there, but treated the country as his own property, merely allowing 800 men discharged from the forces to settle in Emmaus, 3.5 miles from Jerusalem. So, for Raven's sake, I want to let you know, because I think you've missed so much that you didn't even know I was reading this book. I read in the introduction by the translator that he used miles. He translated the word that Josephus used for the word miles as a colloquialism. So, in short, the translation is deliberately misleading because the mile was not the measurement. The word for the measurement was not the same distance as a mile in distance. It is understood that way. He imposed a tax on the Jews whereas they lived, ordering them to pay each year into the capital 2 drachmas a head, the sum they had previously paid into the temple at Jerusalem. Here for the movement, we will leave the affairs to the Jews. In the 4th year of Vespasian's reign, the king of Commagene, Antiochus, found himself and all his family in a most disastrous situation. It was happening thus. Sicinius Paetus, governor of Syria, at the time, either in good faith or to spite Antiochus, it is not certain which, sent a dispatch to Caesar, alleging that Antiochus and his son Epiphanes intended to revolt from Rome, had reached an understanding with the king of Parthia. Preventive action was therefore called for to forestall a sudden move that would throw the whole empire into a state of war. Caesar could hardly overlook an urgent report of such a character. The proximity of the two monarchs made the matter particularly pressing. Samosata, the biggest city of Commagene, lies on the Euphrates, making it very easy for the Parthians, if they had mind to it, to get across and guaranteeing them friendly reception. So this is maybe, it kind of sounds like it's the weapons of mass destruction narrative of its day. It's like, oh my god, here's the new threat. These dudes are 1 month away from raiding the Parthenon. Right? Like, it's this shit. It's this kind of shit. The hordes of Jews are coming if we don't do something about it. We have covered many angles. The claims that Josephus makes in here are interesting because of their appeal to mythology and what it reveals about Jewish narrative in Rome, right? Because you have to understand, Roman thought would be in part shaped by this guy if he's being allowed to publish archivable historical documents of his testimony. Being this level of literate and allowed to publish, big fucking deal. Big fucking deal. That's why it fucking matters. That's why you gotta fucking take off the Jewish goggles. They're turning you into a fucking anti-Semite. They make you look fucking ridiculous. There's a deeper fucking situation happening here. So Paetus, being trusted and empowered to use his own judgment, wasted no time. Suddenly, before Antiochus and his staff had any suspicion, he invaded Commagene at the head of the 6th Legion, supported by some cohorts and a few troops of horse, and further assisted by the kings of Chalcidice and Emesa, Aristobulus and Soemus. Their invasion was unopposed, as none of the inhabitants was prepared to lift a hand against them. Antiochus, suddenly faced with the news, did not for a moment contemplate war with Rome, but decided to leave his kingdom just as it was and slip away with his wife and children, thinking thereby to convince the Romans of his innocence. So he traveled 14 miles from the city and encamped in the plains. So, it's crazy the shit that we put up with these guys, right? Paetus sent a force to occupy Samosata, thus securing the city, while he, with the rest of his troops, set off in pursuit of Antiochus. Not even his desperate situation could tempt the king to take any warlike measures against the Romans. Bewailing his lot, he awaited what was coming to him. His sons, on the other hand, young, experienced in war, and phenomenally strong, could not bring themselves to submit to such a calamity without a struggle, and so Epiphanes and Calinisus, resorted to arms. The battle was violent. Whoops. Oh, where'd I go? Maximus. Okay. Resorted to arms. Thank you. The battle was violent and lasted the whole day. The two leaders displaying noteworthy courage. Have I read 3 pages already? I'm been fucking moving like a motherfucker. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. No, this is page 3. Okay, I got to read this page before the next break. Their forces were intact when dusk broke off the struggle, but not even when the battle ended. Thus did Antiochus see fit to stay. He took his wife and daughters and fled with them into Cilicia, doing irreparable damage to the morale of his own men. For as he had evidently written off his own kingdom, they mutinied and went over to the Romans, and there was no mistaking the universal despair. So, before they were completely bereft of allies, Epiphanes and his brother were obliged to run from the enemy, no more than 10 horsemen across the Euphrates with them. From there they rode without interference to the Parthian court, where Vologeses, like Vologeses, I mean, Volages, it sounds kind of like Volgesus or something, right? It's a little bit weird. It's a weird name. It just doesn't flow. It doesn't fly off the tongue too easy, but it looks cool in print. Anyway, so far from despising them as runaways, received them as if they still enjoyed their old prosperity with all honor. When Antiochus arrived at Tarsus in Cilicia, Paetus sent a centurion to dispatch him in fetters to Rome. But Vespasian refused to let the king be brought to him in this condition, thinking it better to honor their old friendship than to make the war a pretext for relentless animosity. He gave instructions that while he was still on the way, he should be freed from his fetters, and instead of continuing his journey to Rome, should remain for the present in Sparta. He further assigned him a large revenue, enabling him to live not only in luxury, but in royal state. When news of this reached Epiphanes and his brother, who had hitherto been extremely anxious about Antiochus, it was a very great load off their minds. I want to say something real quick because it popped into my head, and I don't want to lose it because I think it helps. I thought about how they flipped the narrative around on the Holocaust. You see, the Eastern Front was pretty crazy, and because it was the Slavs fighting with a lot more hatred, right? Look, there's a legitimate hatred in the heart. Slavs against the Germans, right? Bitter. Ultra bitter. Especially with the nationalist identity of Germany as such versus the Soviet Slavs as such, right? Supply chains getting cut off. I think that these Jews are caught in the middle of their transfer situation. And because it was a nationalist act, right? I am just saying that it would have never been a horror show if they just simply could have been able to keep the supplies, because there's documentation of they bothered to make very nice facilities because they were They were part of, on the official records, they were part of the Nuremberg Codes, which was the Jewish deportation plan. And because the world liked the media, because they're the ones that continually chose to listen to it, they were going to go with what they said by very simple agreements, right? In accord with their thought process, right? America got this way over a very long period of time that involved all sorts of interesting things. And the Civil War had a certain continuity break. There's a missing piece of American culture that is now what we understand as the Dirty South. Because if we have an accurate understanding of the general men of good character in the South getting caught up in the issue because they're the minority vote in whether they ought to be a slave state or not, but didn't own slaves themselves, and probably didn't have the greatest of benefit from slaves, just something that just probably just happened to be there by the choice of someone they were doing business with, or whatever, right? And that there's supposed to be an understanding of treating your slaves well, but then also if somebody's got like a shiner on them, you know that there's codes for whipping, and you know that there's people that enforce slave treatment laws, so on and so forth. So long story short is they starved to death, and then they were burning the bodies that they couldn't bury because they might have been running out of all sorts of space. Because like what Trump is doing now, he's doing it en masse to refill South America's population with both wanted and unwanted types, which took a regional agreement with El Salvador to do. And the only reports of bad things happening that we're getting are reports of due process. Right? And that's really about it. And it's very suspicious that it's that stupid. There isn't the greatest amount of explanation of why there isn't more concerted efforts to get more rational media attention instead of irrational media attention to look at the thing objectively. All right. Anyway, I had to get that flow out of me. They had hoped that Caesar would be reconciled to them as Vologeses. Sorry, I gotta get over this word. Had intervened on their behalf. For though they were living in comfort, they were most unwilling to live outside the Roman Empire. Caesar graciously promised them safe conduct, and they traveled to Rome, where their father at once joined them from Sparta. They were treated with all honor and settled in the city. In an earlier chapter, we referred to the Alamae. Whoops. says, nowhere in the book as we have it. Interesting. Could it have been a typo? Maybe that's why it's not in there. Who knows, right? So that's to be understood. That could have been an error. Could have been a prior editor had gotten their hands on it, perhaps an occult editor. And then that version is the only one that is allowed to get out through the gatekeepers at Penguin Publishing. Understand? Or even above them. This probably goes above them. A Scythian tribe living near the Don in the Sea of Azov. At this stage in the story, as they planned a raid into Media and beyond in search of loot, they negotiated with the king of Hyrcania as master of the pass which King Alexander had closed with gates of iron. He granted them admission, and they were poured through en masse. Then, falling on the unsuspecting Medes, they plundered a populous countryside full of livestock of every kind, meeting with no opposition at all. Pacorus, king of the district, had fled in terror to his hideouts, leaving everything behind except his wife and concubines, who had been taken prisoners and whom he recovered only by the payment of 100 talents. So they continued their raids with the utmost ease and without opposition, advancing as far as Armenia and leaving a trail of destruction behind them. Armenia was ruled by Tiridates, who met them and gave battle, but came within an inch of being taken alive during the fighting. He was lassoed from a distance and would have been dragged off if he had not whipped out his sword and slashed the rope just in time. This battle made the invaders still more savage. They turned the countryside into a desert, and carrying off a large part of the population and quantities of booty from both kingdoms, returned to their own country. In Judea, Bossus had died, and new governor was Flavius Silva, who, seeing the rest of the country reduced to impotence and only one fortress still holding out, marched against it with all available forces. I mean, there's a Josephus in this book, there's a Flavius in this book. Like, these names, there's not that many names. It's not that many names of major players in this story, and they're all fucking, there's different guys. This is like chop suey of first and last names. And I don't think I've heard a three-named person at all. I guess they didn't do that back then. The fortress was Masada, occupied by the Sicarii under the command of an influential man called Eleazar, a descendant of the Judas who had persuaded many Jews, as recorded earlier, not to register when Quirinius was sent as censor into Judea. At this time, the Sicarii combined against those prepared to submit to Rome, and in every way treated them as enemies, looting their property, rounding up their cattle, and setting their dwellings on fire. They were no better than foreigners, they declared, throwing away in this cowardly fashion the freedom won by the Jews at such cost, and avowed choosing slavery under the Romans. In reality, this was a mere excuse intended to cloak their barbarity and avarice. The proof lay in their own actions, for their victims had joined with them in the rebellion and fought by their side against Rome. Yet it was from them that still more brutal treatment was received. When they were again proved guilty of hollow pretense, they did still more mischief to those who, in justifying themselves, condemn the wickedness of their tormentors. Somehow, those days had become so productive of energy of every kind of wickedness among the Jews as to leave no deed of shame uncommitted. And even if someone had used all his powers of invention, he could not have thought of any vice that remained untried. So corrupt was the public and private life of the whole nation, so determined were they to outdo each other in impiety towards God and injustice to their neighbors, the classes ill-using the masses striving to overthrow the classes. One group was bent on domination, the other on violence and on robbing the rich. Sound familiar? First, to begin with lawlessness, this barbarity, to kinsmen were the Sicari, who left no word unspoken, no deed untried. To insult and destroy the object of their foul plots, they even appeared gentle by the side of John. Remember, ChatGPT had said that the Sicari were also basically doing the same thing as the Zealots. So, but I think the Sicari were not Zadokites. I'm not certain about that. They certainly had no Essenic. I don't think maybe they had Essenic. Let's see what's going on here. He not only put to death all advocates of just and profitable courses, treating such as his most bitter foes among the citizens. By his public actions, he subjected his country to countless woes, as a man was sure to do if he had already dared to be impious even towards God. On his table he had unlawful dishes served, and the purification observed by our fathers he set aside, so it was no longer surprising if gentleness and kindness towards men were not shown by one too mad to show piety towards God. Think too of Simon, son of Gaiorus. What crime did he not commit? What outrage was done to free citizens by the men who gave him unlimited power? What friendship of kinsmen were there that did not increase the wantonness of their daily murders? The ill treatment of aliens they look on as the work of a common criminal, but thought it a proof of brilliance to savage their own kith and kin. But even their madness was nothing to the frenzy of the Idumeans. These disgusting people butchered the chief priests so that no trace of divine worship should be left, and then destroyed everything that remained of civil organization, permeating the whole system with utter lawlessness. In this, no one could equal the Zealots, a party which justified its title by its deeds. They followed every bad example, and there was no crime in the records that they did not zealously reproduce. And yet they gave themselves this title in view of their zeal for what was good, either mocking their victims, brutes that they were, or regarding the great evils as good. Thus it was that each of them found a fitting end, God sending them all to the penalty they deserved. Every torment mankind can endure fell upon them to the very end of their lives, when they came face to face with death in all its most agonizing forms. You're talking about the lowest IQ population. They're strung out on fucking drugs. This is what Dr. Hillman is kind of tapping into. Now, I'm not saying that Dr. Hillman is exactly right on on what he's talking about with the original Greek Bible translation, but because he also knows the context of the culture, right? Jesus is like, he's like right there, like before shit popped off, like while like just before Rome was like, we're fed up with you, right? This is basically, this plays as, this is the legacy of Israel after Jesus died, which is why it's my contention as this being a part of Roman history, even if it is not in agreement with certain records, as it still was a part of the Roman history. That I just want to get back to the read, because that's a pretty deep tangent to go on, and I'm kind of drifting off of it. Yet it would be true to say that they suffered less misery than they had caused. To suffer what they deserved was impossible, but this is not the time to lament for the victims of their savagery, richly as they deserve it, so I will take up the story where I broke it off. The reader cannot fail to observe the lack of precise charges in this irrelevant, vindictive, and self-righteous digression. So once again, this is a footnote trying to say, okay, Josephus is lying right here. We translated it, just letting you know that we officially consider this thought a lie. Is what that's what that annotation is saying, right? You know, which is not, the annotation should be commenting on translation technicals. That's it. It should not be giving me editorial notes on opinion. It is already understood in the foreword of the fucking book that I read that this shit is going on. You know, and you want me to believe that you've underscored every little thing that is wrong in this? No, you're going to only give me the ones that you want me to focus on. Right? And so, why would this? Okay, this is his opinion, technically speaking. The way he's framing it. Anyway, against Eleazar and the Sicari, who with him held Maceda, came the Roman general at the head of his forces. He at once subdued the whole area, and stationing garrisons at strategic points, threw a wall right round the fortress so that none of the besieged should find it easy to escape, and posted sentries. He established his own headquarters in a place that seemed most opportune for directing the siege, where the rocks on which the fortress stood were linked to the mountains nearby, though it was an awkward position for bringing up necessary supplies, for not only was food brought from a distance at the cost of painful toil from the Jews detailed for the task. Also, another thing, see that annotation, if it really felt it had to say something, it could have fucking simply said that this passage here is coming from Josephus's attitudes of personal moral character and yada yada yada, right? Which would also be hysterical because it's kind of redundant, because that is kind of what Josephus is speaking for. I mean, I'd say that if Josephus was a true believer, then and perhaps a decent guy, that it would at least sound like this. It could be wrong. He's probably being duped on some level. If he's a politician, people are going to lie to him that are the authorities above him to give him plausible deniability, and then he can just rest on that lie. This is how Jordan Peterson gets away with having a cap and becoming a gatekeeper on consciousness and being steered in thought towards something more utilitarian for Canada. And, you know, or whoever these prime ministers, like the next person who's going to run for prime minister now has to remember, like, if you didn't actually think ever before that you have to persuade the King of England to let you be the Prime Minister of Canada, do you understand? That's your reality, Canada. That's not America's reality. That's showing you a true figurehead. Right? Does the king have to do that in Australia? Right? And all that was in reaction to the tariffs. I don't know whose benefit that's for. Anyway, even drinking water had to be fetched to the camp, as a neighborhood possessed no spring. These preliminary dispositions completed, Silva began the siege operations, which called for great skill and immense exertions in view of the strength of the fortress, which I will now describe. Before I continue, I'm off track on my my count here. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, perfect. End of this page. A rock with a very large perimeter and lofty all the way along is on every side broken off by deep ravines. Their bottom is out of sight, and from it rise sheer cliffs on which no animal can fetch a foothold except in 2 places where the rock can, with great difficulty, be climbed. One of these paths came from the Dead Sea to the east, the other from the west, an easier route. They call the first one the Snake, with reference to its narrowness and constant windings. It is broken as it rounds the projecting cliffs and often turns back on itself, then lengthening out again a little at a time, manages to make some trifling advance. It sounds kind of like the Ouroboros. Walking along it is like balancing on a tightrope. The least slip means death. The Fool card. For on either side yawns an abyss so terrifying. This sounds so fucking dramatic. So terrifying that it could make the boldest tremble. After an agonizing march of 3.5 miles, the summit is reached, which does not narrow to a sharp point, but is a sort of elevated plateau. On this, the high priest, Jonathan, first built a fortress and named it Masada. So, a high priest. Not, this would be a rabbi? One of the, or do they have Jewish priests? Or is this a Roman? His name is John, right? But we're talking about something with Jewish practice, right? I maybe have glossed over a point while reading properly to you guys. Anyway, sorry for that kind of confusion. Later, King Herod devoted great care to the improvement of the place. The entire summit, measuring 3.5 mile round, the enclosed within a limestone wall 18 feet high and 12 wide, in which He erected 37 towers 75 feet high. From these, one could pass through a ring of chambers right round the inside of the wall, for the plateau was of rich soil, more workable than any plain, and the king reserved it for cultivation, so that if ever there was a shortage of food from without, this should not injure those who had entrusted their safety to these ramparts. He built a palace, too, on the western slope, before the fortifications on the crest, and inclining in a northerly direction. The place was of great height and strongly built, with 90-foot towers at the four corners. The design of the apartments within the colonnades and bathrooms was varied and magnificent. Magnificent bathrooms, he says. The supporting pillars cut from a single block. In every case, the partition walls and floors of the room tiled with stones of many hues. All right, we're going to pause it right there, and we're going to move into the next song, which is called, this is the song Ice I was talking about earlier. Okay, that somebody, whoever runs the Endless Winter channel that put this, their timestamps are off by like 2 seconds. So I actually had paused it at the exact right moment. There we go. Anyway, I really like that. I've done little jam sessions that kind of flow in that direction. My problem is that I have a hard time capturing the lightning in a bottle. Um, because I spend a lot of time working on just trying to do something that sounds good. You know, just am I sounding good just playing the damn thing, right? Because there's something missing without the band in my playing ability. Something suffers without a band. It's just I think I am making the only steps that are meant for me to overcome that. But anyway, either way, let's get back on this. At every spot where people lived, whether on the plateau, round the palace, or before the wall, he had cut out in the rock numbers of great tanks to hold water, ensuring a supply as great as where spring water can be used. A sunken road led from the palace to the hilltop, invisible from outside. So hold on a second. Plateau, round the palace or before the walls, he had cut out in the rock numbers of great tanks to hold water. So they had some sort of stone work done to make to hollow out a piece of stone for water. I wonder what their stone tools were like. I don't think that we're talking about anything mystical. I think it's probably mundane, on the record stuff. But because he didn't describe them exactly, it sounds big and impressive. I want to know what kind of stone they were using. Because if it's soft stone, that's fine, right? They probably want to have a stone that's not that soft, but not that hard. Because the harder the stone, the heavier it is, right? And then I'd imagine they'd have to have a whole thing. Like, do they just do pails of water? Is that how they're set up? Or do they have a transport system with pipes? Nor was it easy for an enemy to use even the visible roads. The eastern one, as already explained, was by nature unusable. The western was guarded by a large fort at its narrowest point, at least 500 yards from the crest. To pass this was impossible, to capture it by no means easy. While it had been made difficult even for innocent travelers to get away, so strong had the fortress's defenses against enemy attack been made, both by nature and by human effort. The provisions stored inside were even more astonishing in their abundance and diversity, and in their perfect preservation. The stores included a great quantity of corn, more than enough to last for many years, and quantities of wine and soil, with pulse of all varieties, and dates in great heaps. All these Eleazar found when, by a trick, he and his Sicarii made themselves masters of the fortress. They were perfectly fresh and just as good as on the day they were laid in. Yet from the day to the capture by the Romans was about 100 years. In fact, the Romans found what was left of the various foods in excellent condition. We should not be far wrong if we put down their preservation to the atmosphere, which at the height of the plateau is free men any earthy, filthy taint. There was found, too, a quantity of weapons of every kind, stored there by the king, and enough for 10,000 men, as well as unwrought iron and bronze and store of lead. For these preparations, indeed, there were very strong reasons. It is believed that Herod equipped this fortress as a refuge for himself, suspecting a double danger: the danger from the Jewish masses, who might push him off his throne and restore to power the royal house that had preceded him, and the greater and more terrible danger from the Egyptian queen Cleopatra, for she did not conceal her intentions, but constantly appealed to Antony, begging him to destroy Herod and requesting the transfer to herself of the kingdom of Judea. It's amazing that all these characters are actually alive at the same time. Do we get that context in history now? Right? Do you understand why they push the historical record of these guys over, like, why don't we talk more about straight up Sun Tzu and his life, or some fucking, like, Russian dude who you've never heard of but is very interesting, and here, let's get this publication properly translated and widely distributed, that's been around for 100 years but has been sitting on the dust shelf in some editor's office as a serial number footnote of something that you only have a title translated for, something like that, right? Like the legal page at the front of the book is translated, and that's about it. Anyway, the surprising thing is not that there should have been any question of his gratifying her, but that he did not yield to her demands, hopelessly enslaved as he was by his passion for her. Okay, yeah, the Mark Antony lusting thing. Such were the fears that made Herod fortify Masada, little dreaming that he was to leave it to the Romans as their very last task in the war against the Jews. So whoever's putting up Mark Antony to his permitted global goals by the unseen forces behind his throne, I think, my suspicion is that he's got secret, personal, occulted reasons why he is doing this, right? A guy like Mark Antony doesn't have to fucking simp to Cleo fucking Patra. However, if you are playing politics with the Egyptian people, and let's just say the Egyptian people may still have reverence for women in a manner that their neighbors may not, but the Jews do, because the Jews have their very strong relationships with their women. The Guyoniman Gynocracy Chronicles ought to be looked into. Michael Tessarion and Seth Gazboza and Mark Passio all talk about that kind of thing, and many, many other persons. Some of them wouldn't know it precisely by that name, but if somebody said that name to that, they would say that's probably the perfect name for it. Such were the fears that made Hord fortify Masada, little dreaming that he was to leave it to the Romans as their very last task in the war against the Jews. As he had now finished the projected exterior wall encircling the whole position to make absolutely sure that no one slipped out, the Roman commander actively prosecuted the siege. Though he had found only one place where it was possible to construct platforms behind the tower that guarded the road leading from the west to the palace, and the ridge was a rocky projection, quite wide enough and running out a long way, but 450 feet below the level of Masada. It was called the White Cliff. So climbing up and taking possession of this, Silva ordered the troops to heap earth on it. They worked with a will and with ample manpower, and soon a solid platform had been raised to a height of 300 feet. As, however, this did not seem either strong or big enough to carry the engines, they built on top of it a pier composed of great stones fitted together, 75 feet wide and the same height. The engines were similar in construction to those devised by Vespasian first and later by Titus for their siege operations. Further, a tower was erected 90 feet high and covered all over the iron plates. On this, the Romans mounted a number of quick loaders and stone throwers, which pelted the defenders, driving them from the battlements and forcing them to keep under cover. Silva had a great ram constructed. Now by his orders it was swung continuously against the wall, till at long last a breach was made and a small section collapsed. Inside, however, the Sicarii had lost no time in building a second wall, which even the engines were likely to find a tougher proposition. It was pliant and capable of absorbing the impetus of the blows, owing to its peculiar construction. Huge bulks were laid lengthwise and fastened together at the ends. Those were in two parallel rows, separated by the width of a wall and with the space between filled with earth, so that as the height increased, the soil should not fall out. They laid beams across the long bulks to secure them. To the enemy, the rampart looked like a normal construction, but the blows of the engines falling on yielding earth were absorbed. The concussion shook it together and made it more solid. Seeing this, Silva decided that the fire was the best weapon against such a wall and instructed his men to direct a volley of burning torches at it. Being made mostly of wood, it soon caught fire. Owing to its loose construction, the whole thickness was soon ablaze, and a mass of flame shot up. Just as the fire broke out, a gust of wind from the north alarmed the Romans. It blew back the flame from above and drove it in their faces, and as their engines seemed on the point of being consumed in the blaze, they were plunged into despair. Then, all of a sudden, as if by divine providence, the wind swung to the south, and the blowing strongly in reverse direction carried and flung the flames against the wall, turning it into the solid blazing mass. God was indeed on the side of the Romans. Wild how these, how people think, right? Who returned to camp full of delight, intending to assail the enemy early next day. and all night long kept with unusual vigilance to ensure that none of them slipped out unobserved. But Eleazar had no intention of slipping out himself, or of allowing anyone else to do so. He saw his wall going up in flames. He could think of no other means of escape or heroic endeavor. He had a clear picture of what the Romans would do to men, women, and children if they won the day. And death seemed to him the right choice for them all, making up his mind that in the circumstances this was the wisest course. He collected the toughest of his comrades and urged it upon them in a speech of which this was the substance. My loyal followers, long ago, we resolved to serve neither the Romans nor anyone else but only God. Sorry, hold on a second. Right. Yeah, okay, so I was counting in my head the pages. I was trying to do that fast. Who alone is the true and righteous Lord of men, now the time has come that bids us prove our determination by our deeds. At such a time we must not disgrace ourselves. Hitherto we have never submitted to slavery, even when it brought no danger with it. We must not choose slavery now, and with it penalties that will mean the end of everything if we fall alive into the hands of the Romans. For we were the first of all to revolt, and shall be the last to break off the struggle. And I think it is God who has given us this privilege, that we can die nobly as free men, unlike others who are unexpectedly defeated. In our case, it is evident that the daybreak will end our resistance, but we are free to choose an honorable death with our loved ones. This our enemies cannot prevent. However earnestly they may pray to take us alive, nor can we defeat them in battle. For the very first, when we were bent on claiming our freedom, but suffered such constant misery at each other's hands, and worse at the enemy's, we ought perhaps to have read the mind of God and realized that his once beloved Jewish race had been sentenced to extinction. For if he had remained gracious or only slightly indignant with us, he would not have shut his eyes to the destruction of so many thousands, or allowed his most holy city to be burnt to the ground by our enemies. We hoped, or so it would seem, that of all the Jewish race we alone would come through safe, still in possession of our freedom, as if we had committed no sin against God and taken part in no crime, we who had taught the others. So, let me think here. 83, 84, 85, 86. Yeah, okay, just got to read this page. Now we now see how he shows the folly of our hopes, plunging us into miseries more terrible than any we had dreamt of. Not even the impregnable of our fortresses has sufficed to save us, but though we have food in abundance, ample supplies of arms, and more than enough of every other requisite, God himself, without a doubt, has taken away all hope of survival. The fire that was being carried into the enemy lines did not turn back of its own accord towards the wall we had built. These things are God's vengeance for the many wrongs that in our madness we dared to do to our own countrymen. For those wrongs let us pay the penalty, not to our bitterest enemies, the Romans, but to God. By our own hands. It will be easier to bear. Let our wives die unabused, our children without knowledge of slavery. After that, let us do each other an ungrudging kindness, preserving our freedom as a glorious winding sheet. But first, let our possessions and the whole fortress go up in flames. It will be a bitter blow to the Romans that I know to find our persons beyond their beyond their reach, and nothing left for them to loot. One thing only, let us spare our store of food. It will bear witness when we are dead to the fact that we perished, not through want, but because, as we resolved at the beginning, we choose death rather than slavery. If I understand correctly, these are the attitudes of the Sicarii. So the Sicarii are a little bit like they're bad dudes. They're explained as bad dude types, but they are not the Zealots, right? For them, this was a different kind of fight. The Sicarii, they might have been, they might have been the other kind of, I don't know, it's interesting. I think maybe that they had a lifestyle that they cared about, right? Like, these guys are like organized gangsters as opposed to just the mob, right? So these guys were like the mafia, right? So they're going to go out as the warlords that they like to be, right? This is our last stand. We're not going to wait till we're fucking starving. We're going to have an awesome death in this situation. So anyway, one thing only let us spare. All right. Such was Eleazar's appeal. It did not meet with the same response from all his hearers. Some were eager to do as he said, and filled something like rapture at the thought that death was so noble. Others, less heroic, were moved by pity for their wives and family, and certainly, too, by the prospect of their own end. And as they exchanged glances, the tears in their eyes betrayed the repugnance they felt. When he saw them playing, the coward in their spirits quailing before the bold sweep of his plan, Eleazar was afraid that even those who had not flinched when they heard his proposals might be unmanned by other men's tears and laments. So instead of abandoning his appeal, he roused himself and, bursting with ardor, began a more dazzling display of oratory on the immortality of the soul. Looking hard at his wet-eyed listeners and complaining bitterly, he began. One second. I made a sad mistake in thinking I had the support of loyal followers. In the street for freedom, men resolve to live honorably or die. You are not a bit different from all the Sunday and courage and boldness, you who fear death, even when it means the end of utter misery. A course in which you ought not to hesitate or wait for someone to advise you. Ever since primitive man began to think, the words of our ancestors and of the gods, supported by the actions and spirits of our forefathers, have constantly impressed on us that life is the calamity for man, not death. Death gives freedom to our souls and lets them depart to their own pure home, where they will know nothing of any calamity. I clipped my lip ever so slightly. I didn't break skin, but I kind of pinched it. So it was very interesting reading that part and wondering if that was an augury, where I made that little pause and I started playing with my gums. Anyway. And that we're talking about the soul and all that stuff. So I can see that as a moment of paying attention in sorts, because normally I am used to biting my tongue, not biting my lip. I think I was down by where nature can reach, right? I'm going to read up here, though. It makes the body its own organ of sense, moving it invisibly and impelling it in actions further than mortal nature can reach. That's very. He's making some very metaphysical statements. In fact, it's very interesting. He's taking this route of explanation. Like he's making a why your soul goes a certain way argument. But when freed from the weight that drags it down to earth and is hung about it, the soul returns to its own place. Then in truth it partakes of a blessed power and an utterly unfettered strength, remaining as invisible to human eyes as God himself. Not even while it is in the body can it be viewed. It enters undetected and departs unseen, having itself one imperishable nature, but causing a change in the body for whatever the soul touches lives and blossoms. Whatever it deserts withers and dies. Such a abundance it has of immortality. Sleep will provide you with the present proof of what I say. In sleep, souls left to themselves and free from bodily distractions enjoy the most blissful repose, and consorting with God, whose kin they are, they go wherever they will and foretell many of the things to come. Why, pray, should we fear death if we love to repose and sleep? Okay, so this is a culture that's a big fan, and perhaps this is a freedom they're fighting for, to interpret dreams. Interesting, eh? And isn't it absurd to run after the freedom of this life and grudge ourselves the freedom of eternity? It might be expected that we, so carefully taught at home, would be an example to others of readiness to die. But if we do need the testimony of foreigners, let us look to those Indians who profess to practice philosophy. They are men of true courage, who, regarding their life as a kind of service, must render to nature, undergo it with reluctance, and hasten to release their souls from their bodies. So very interesting. He's appealing to, is he talking about Vedic or Hindu or Buddhist? And though no misfortune presses or drives them away, desire for immortal life. Remember, there's a big difference between immortal and eternal, and why I changed my last name to Eternal. Desire for immortal life impels them to inform their friends that they are going to depart. No one tries to stop them, but everyone congratulates them and gives them messages for his dear ones. So, confidently and so truly do they believe that the souls share a common life. I don't like amongst the New Agers when they've got that entity that's always like, dear ones. Like, first thing it has to do is come in like it's like your auntie who has some sort of semi-authority over you. You're like sitting in a kindergarten and your aunt comes in and is telling all the kids what to do, and all it is that she's everyone's aunt. Right? That's kind of like the vibe check I get. Okay. I think I was not supposed to read this far down to Yeah, I read to the bottom of 86. I think I was supposed to read just the top of 86, but I think I got carried away explaining the whole soul thing. We're going to take the break. All right, we're going to take a break right here. Second. We are halfway through this album now. So now, this song runs about 11 minutes. This is the actual lament song. Very interesting that the actual lament song hits right when we're talking about the soul. I really love the way they wrote this album. And honestly, I really love the way they produced it too. Like this is good shit. This is good shit. And this isn't even like the best production, but it falls right where it belongs. This is good. This is good shit. This is good shit. I love it. I love it. All right, I gotta make sure my buddy Vinny's got to hear this shit. Vinny will like this shit. He's working on a doom metal project. Then, after receiving these commissions, they consign their bodies to the flames, that the soul may be as pure as possible when it is separated from the body, and hymns are sung to them as they die. In fact, they are sent off more happily by their dearest ones to death than other men are sent by their fellow citizens on a long journey. The bereaved may weep for themselves, but the departed they deem happy, ranked now among the immortals. Well then, are we not ashamed to show a poorer spirit than Indians, and by our want of courage to bring the law of our fathers, the envy of all the world, into utter contempt? So there was a narrative that the Indians were just super great with all their bathing in the Ganges River and such. Anyway, even if from the very first we had been taught the contrary belief that life is indeed the greatest good of mankind and death a disaster, the situation is such that we should still be called upon to bear it with a stout heart, for God's will and sheer necessity doom us to death. Long ago, it seems, God issued this warning to the whole Jewish race together, that life would be taken from us if we misused it. Do not fasten the blame on yourselves, or give the Romans the credit for the fact that we are all ruined by the war against them. This is all the same speech from the guy, right? I'm pretty sure we didn't miss a transition, right? It is not through their power that these things have happened. A mightier hand has intervened to give them the outward shape of victory. What Roman weapons slew the Jews who lived in Caesarea? Why, they had no thought of rebelling against Rome, but were in the middle of their seventh-day ceremonies when the Caesarean mafia rushed at them, and though they offered no resistance, butchered them with their wives and children, paying no heed to the Romans, who were treating none as enemies except ourselves, who had in fact rebelled. Paying no heed to the Romans, who were treating none as enemies. Okay, so all right, I was just trying to grasp the situation he was contextually framing everything, because it looks like he is saying that the Romans at that time were the ones in the right, were the ones of the men of good character who didn't want there to be enemies here, right? Like the Jews completely soured their good favor with the Romans because of the generational decay. No doubt I shall be told that Caesarians had a permanent quarrel with the Jews in their midst and simply seized their chance to vent their old hatred. Then, what are we to say of the Jews in Scythopolis? They had the effrontery to make war on us to please the Greeks. So, are the Jews from Scythopolis Scythian Jews? That's my question. let me see here. To be honest, I wanna ask the internet a question. I'm gonna use DuckDuckGo, not AI. But DuckDuckGo uses AI. We'll see what happens. What's my question again? What is the etymology of Scythopolis? Let me make sure I spelled that right. Where's the word? Where's the word? Oops, there's the word. Now I see it. Shoot, moved the wrong thing around. Scyth. Yeah. I think I spelled that right. Yes. Alright. Okay, it doesn't use AI. It won't give me an AI answer unless I click a button for an AI answer, so I can opt out of the AI answer. Let's see. McClintock, Oxford reference. Man, DuckDuckGo doesn't. I use the word etymology. You don't want to give me etym online? We don't like etym online anymore? Is that the problem? Latin words, Scythopolis, English meaning the name Scythopolis translate to city of the Scythians. Alright, city located in modern day Israel, specifically for the general name reflects. Alright. Near the Jordan Valley, the name reflects its historical association with the Scythians, nomadic groups that lived in the region of various points in time. Scythopolis comprised of two elements, Scyths, meaning Scythian, and polis, meaning city. The term was adopted into Latin and used to signify the same location. The Scythians were a group of ancient nomadic people known for their horse culture. Right. Okay. All right. Latin in Antiquitatis, Scythopolis, translation. Latin, noun, delineation. All right. Goong.com with 2 O's gave me that answer. That's a satisfactory answer for now. All right. Or is the quarrel because they weren't Jews, they were Scythians? Maybe they converted Judaism, but aren't necessarily of the bloodline. No doubt I shall be told that the Caesarians had a permanent quarrel with the Jews in their midst and simply seized their chance to vent their old hatred. Then, what are we to say of the Jews in Scythopolis? They had the effrontery to make war on us to please the Greeks and would not join with us, their own kith and kin, to drive out the Romans. Much good they got from their faithful support of the Greeks. They were brutally massacred by them, they and their entire households. Such was the reward their alliance brought them. What they saved the Greeks from suffering at our hands, they themselves endured as if it was they who had wished to inflict it. It would take too long to speak now about every individual case. You know that of all the towns in Syria, there isn't one that hasn't exterminated its Jewish inhabitants. Though they were more hostile to us than the Romans. As a single instance, the Damascenes, though they couldn't even fake a plausible excuse, made their own city reek with the most loathsome slaughter, butchering 18,000 Jews and their wives and families as well. As for those tortured to death in Egypt, it was stated that the number was something over 60,000. Wow. Really? They're this living example of being the demonstration of falling into the trap of government, right? They're so ridiculously freedom and independence crazy that they take it to one of two extremes. They're ultra right wingers or ultra left wingers, effectively. It's a bit ridiculous. Oh, and by the way, if I didn't mention, there are 8 pages left. So now I'm reading 4 at a time because there's only one song left in the album. They perhaps died in this way because in a foreign land they could find no answer to their enemies, but all those who in their own took up arms against Rome had everything, hadn't they? They could give them hope of certain victory. So once again, you know what, I'm kind of curious, so I've got to ask. Did I close? I closed it, didn't I? Open this again and ask another question. What? Okay. What was Syria's issue with Jews in the time of Vespasian? Ooh, I'm gonna go with Vespasian. Alright. First Jewish-Roman War, history next. Vespasian. Hold on a minute. Let's use the possessive apostrophe and ask the question again. Okay. War. It's preliminary. Josephus had trained, and by the time Vespasian, 1 second, thank you. Now, this is giving me military context. I want cultural context. Okay. Okay, I asked too vague of a question. Hold on a second. Let me rephrase the question. Okay, why was Syria so harsh with Jews in the time? Okay. Harsh may not even be the right word to ask, right? Alright, I'm going to move on. I don't have an answer. Weapons, walls, impregnable fortresses, and the spirit that in the cause of liberty no danger could shake encouraged all to rebel. But these things were effective for a very short time. They raised our hopes only to prove the beginning of worse misfortunes. All were captured. All came into the enemy's hands as if proved specially to make their victories more splendid, not to save the lives of those who fashioned them, those who died in battle. We may well congratulate. They died defending their freedom, not betraying it. But the masses who are now under the thumb of Rome, who would not pity, who would not hasten to die rather than share their fate. Some of them have been broken on the rack of tortured to death at the stake or by the lash. Some have been half eaten by savage beasts and then kept alive to be their food a second time after providing amusement and support for their enemies. Of them all we have most cause to pity those who are still alive, for they pray and pray for the death that never comes. This is all the same speech. Like, all this was recorded. So somebody wrote all this down. Like, probably the way they are big into writing. Where is the mighty city, the mother city of the whole Jewish race? Secure within so many encircling walls, sheltering behind so many forts and lofty towers, bursting with warlike stores, and defended by thousands and thousands of determined men. Where now is the city that was believed to have God for her founder? She has been torn up by the roots, and the only memorial of her that is left is the camp of her destroyers that still occupies her ruins. Old men with streaming eyes sit by the ashes of the shrine, and with a few women kept by the enemy as victims of their lust. Which us, realizing these facts, could bear to see the light of day, even if he could live free from danger? Who is such an enemy to his country? Who so unmanly and so wedded to life as not to be sorry he is alive today? If only we had all died before seeing the sacred city utterly destroyed by enemy hands, the holy sanctuary so impiously uprooted. But since an honorable ambition deluded us into thinking that perhaps we should succeed in avenging her of her enemies, and now all hope has fled, abandoning us to our fate, let us at once choose death with honor and do the kindest thing we can for ourselves, our wives and children, while it is still possible to show ourselves any kindness. After all, we were born to die, we and those we brought into the world. This even the luckiest must face. But outrage, slavery, and the sight of our wives led away to shame with our children. These are not evils to which man is subject by the laws of nature. Men undergo them through their own cowardice. If they have a chance to forestall them by death and will not retake it. We were very proud of our courage, so we revolted from Rome. Now in the final stages, they have offered to spare our lives, and we have turned the offer down. Is anyone too blind to see how furious they will be if they take us alive? Pity the young whose bodies are strong enough to survive prolonged torture. Pity the not so young whose old frames would break under such ill usage. A man will see his wife violently carried off. He will hear the voice of his child crying, "Daddy," when his own hands are fettered. Come, while our hands are free and can hold a sword. Let them do a noble service. Let us die unenslaved by our enemies, and leave this world as free men in company with our wives and children. That is what the law ordains. That is what our wives and children demand of us. The necessity God has laid on us, the opposite of what the Romans wish. They are anxious none of us should die before the town is captured. So let us deny the enemy their hoped for pleasure at our expense, and without more ado leave them to be dumbfounded by our death and awed by our courage. Eleazar had many more arguments to urge, But all his listeners cut him short, full of uncontrollable enthusiasm, made haste to do the deed. As if possessed, they rushed off, everyone anxious to be quicker than the next man, and regarding it as proof positive of manliness and wisdom, not to be found among the last. So irresistible a desire had seized them to slaughter their wives, their little ones, and themselves. It might have been thought that, as they approached their task, their determination would have weakened, but they clung resolutely to the purpose they had formed while listening to the appeal. And while they all retained feelings of personal affection, reason, which had urged what was best for their dear ones, won the day. For at the very moment when, with streaming eyes, they embraced and caressed their wives, and taking their children in their arms, pressed upon them the last lingering kisses, hands other than their own seemed to assist them, and they carried out their purpose. The thought of the agonies they would suffer at the hands of their enemies, consoling them for the necessity of killing them. 1 second, I think that's page 4 already, isn't it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, this, I gotta read this. This is page 4. All right. Oh, God. Ooh, I gotta do a little bit of yoga after this. In the end, not a man failed to carry out his terrible resolve, but one and all disposed of their entire families, victims of cruel necessity, who with their own hands murdered their wives and children, and felt it to be the lightest of evils. Yeah, so, because they're worried about, the Romans, these are not good men, right? Like, they want to plunder. They want to kill, they want to kill people, and they don't want people to have their independence, to live by their laws, and to and to have certain ways of life not interfered with. And I don't want to know what was emotionally going on right then. Was this what the wives wanted? Why would everything get driven to that point? You have to be living in a very small bubble of a world, right? To hold out for so long when such, it sucks. And we're not really any better on our end. At least historically. And under certain circumstances, very deliberately, as I've reminded people about the use of different kinds of freed Negroes during the American Civil War, using the juxtaposition of regulars being trained in glory versus some of the regulars being trained by others, where they're basically put in a slave soldier uniform, where the other group, they were given the full honors because they wanted to be dignified men. In the end, not a man failed to carry out his terrible resolve, but one and all disposed of their entire families, victims of cruel necessity who with their own hands murdered their wives and children and felt it to be the lightest of evils. Unable to endure any longer the horror of what they had done, and thinking they would be wronging the dead if they outlived them a moment longer, they quickly made one heap of all they possessed and set it on fire, and then 10 of them had been chosen by lot to be the executioners of the rest. Every man lay down beside his wife and children where they lay, flung his arms round them, and exposed his throat to those who must perform the painful office. These unflinchingly slaughtered them, then agreed on the same rule for each other, so that one who drew the lot should kill the 9, and the last of all himself. Such perfect confidence they all had in each other, that neither in doing nor in suffering would one differ from another. So now what does the Peanut Gallery have to say about this one? What a contrast with the author's own perfidy of Josephus. Okay. What kind of annotation is that? Are you can you explain yourself a little bit? Because I know Josephus was in this book. Why is it so directly relevant? Why did you have to bring that up at all? So, finally, the 9... I am sorry, there is a speck of something in my eye. It's driving me crazy. Ugh. So finally the 9 presented their throats, and the one man left till last first surveyed the serried ranks of the dead, in case amidst all the slaughter someone was still left in need of his hand. Then finding that all had been dispatched, set the palace blazing fiercely, summoning all his strength, drove his sword right through his body, and fell dead by the side of his family. Thus these men died, supposing that they had left no living soul to fall into the hands of the Romans. But an old woman escaped along with another who was related to Eleazar, in intelligence and education superior to most women, and 5 little children. They had hidden in the conduits that brought drinking water underground, while the rest were intent upon the suicide pact. Interesting. These numbered 960 women and children included. The tragedy was enacted on the 15th of Xanthicus. Expecting further resistance, the Romans armed themselves at dawn with gangways, bridged the gap between platform and ramparts, then made their assault, seeing no enemy but dreadful solitude on every side, fire within, and silence. There were a lot of guess what had happened. At last, as if giving the signal for a volley, they shouted in the hope that someone of those inside would show themselves. The noise came to the ears of the women, who emerged from the conduits, gave the Romans a detailed account of what had happened. The second of them providing a lucid report of Eleazar's speech and the action that had followed. We're going to pick up on the other end of the last break. This jam is called Fire Promise. That's the whole album. One song per break. Got 4 pages left and we're done. Hold on a second. Let me make sure Mike's signal's good. All right. They found it difficult to believe her and were skeptical of such astounding resolution. But they attempted to extinguish the blaze and quickly cut a way through the inside of the palace. When they came upon the rows of dead bodies, they did not exult over them as enemies, but admired the nobility of their resolve, and the way in which so many had shown in carrying it out without a tremor and utter contempt of death. Masada having fallen thus, the general left a garrison in the fortress and returned with the rest of his army to Caesarea. For nowhere was there an enemy left. The whole country had been subdued in the long war which had made itself felt by many, even of the remotest inhabitants, and had endangered their peace. The next incident occurred in Egypt and the cost of the lives of many Jews. Some members of the party of the Sicarii had managed to escape to Alexandria, where, not satisfied with being still alive, they started a subversive movement urging many of their hosts to claim their freedom and to regard the Romans as no whit their superiors, honoring God as their own masters. When certain Jews in prominent positions objected, they were murdered. The rest were constantly urged to revolt. Seeing the mad folly of the agitators, the leaders of the Senate decided it was no longer safe to overlook what was going on, and summoning all the Jews to a mass meeting, exposed the mad folly of the Sicarii, showing them to the cause of all the trouble. Now they went on. Not even after their escape had they any certain hope of safety, since once organized by the Romans, they would instantly be killed. So they were trying to bring the disaster due to themselves on those who had had no part in their crimes. So they urged the gathering to take care that these men did not bring them to ruin. They could justify themselves to the Romans by handing them over. Recognizing that the danger was very real, the audience accepted their advice, and making a furious rush at the Sicarii, rounded them up. 600 were caught, and then a number escaped into Egypt and Egyptian Thebes, but were soon apprehended and brought back. There was universal astonishment at the fortitude and desperation, or was it strength of mind? So remember, the Sicarii are a mob boss kind of twisted idea of freedom, according to Josephus. For all we know, maybe these guys were the only good guys, for all we know, right? And that all of this is a fabrication meant to make them look bad by one guy who was just like, oh my God, yeah, he's one of us, but we didn't know he was doing all that shit, right? Or something like that. And of course, as conspiracy things would go, people would find that hard to believe, especially if they knew how many associations and how often he would have, so on and so forth. So you're looking here, he escapes justice, but then they catch him outside of Roman jurisdiction and bring him back into Roman jurisdiction. That's precisely what's going on right now with ICE. Okay. So brought back. There was universal astonishment at the fortitude and desperation, or was it strength of mind, that they displayed, subject to every form of torture and bodily suffering that could be thought of, for the one purpose of making them acknowledge Caesar as Lord. Not a man gave in or came near to saying it, but rising above the strongest compulsion, they all maintained their resolve, and it seemed as if their bodies felt no pain, and their souls were almost exultant as they met the tortures and the flames. So, the context of what it means to swear that you now accept Caesar as your Lord, right? They're a lordship-based deity cult, right? Which is going to be actually of an earthen nature, right? It's going to fall into those same lines. Where something like Empire is definitely much more of a sky god nature, right? So these guys are the part of the demonized, more paganized kinds of Jews. That's what I think is part of this. But I have to up my study on things. That's just me kind of saying, like, I would want to double check some correlations, see if I'm onto something, or am I stark raving mad? Okay, so, but nothing amazed the spectators as much as the behavior of young children, for not one of them could be constrained to call Caesar Lord. So far did the strength of a brave spirit prevail over the weakness of their little bodies. Lupus, who was in charge of Alexandria at the time, promptly reported their disturbances to Caesar. Right, so like calling Caesar Lord, it's kind of like the difference between somebody who has given energy to voting versus somebody who has abstained from voting. Right? I haven't voted in 4 years and I feel great. 5 years, technically. He viewed with suspicion the continual turbulence of the Jews, and fearing that they might again assemble their forces and win new adherents, instructed Lupus to pull down the Jewish sanctuary in the district of Onias. Onias is in Egypt, a settlement that was founded and received this name in the following circumstances. Onias, son of Simon and one of the chief priests in Jerusalem, fled from Antiochus, the Syrian king, during his war with the Jews, and came to Alexandria, where he was given a friendly reception by Ptolemy, who detested Antiochus. Onias declared that he would win him the support of the whole Jewish race if he would agree to his suggestions. When the king undertook to do all he could, Onias asked leave to build a sanctuary somewhere in Egypt where he could worship God as his father had done. This would make the Jews still more hostile to Antiochus, who had plundered their temple at Jerusalem, and more friendly disposed to himself and freedom of worship, would bring many of them to his side. Pleased with this suggestion, Ptolemy gave him a piece of ground 21 miles from Memphis. The district is called the Nome of Heliopolis. There, Onias constructed a fortress and built his sanctuary, not like that in Jerusalem, but resembling a tower of large blocks of stone and to a height of 90 feet. But in designing the altar, he copied the one at home, and he enriched the temple with the same kind of offerings, except for the shape of the lampstand. He did not make a stand at all, but simply had a lamp hammered out of gold. It gave a bright light and was hung by a gold chain. The whole temple precincts were encircled with a wall of baked brick, in which the gateways were of stone. The king further allotted him a large district to bring him in revenue, so that the priests should enjoy abundance and God should have ample provision for his worship. Unfortunately, the motive of the Onias in doing all this was not to his credit. He was anxious to outdo the Jews in Jerusalem, as he bore them a grudge for his exile, and thought that by raising his temple, he could induce the masses to leave them for it. There he had been too, an ancient prophecy made about 600 years before. 550 would be a nearer figure. The prophecy will be found in ISXIX 19. Is that Isaiah? I don't know what IS is. What is. It depends on what the definition of is. Oh my gosh, I didn't put the reader up. See, nobody's here, so I am so sorry. I forgot to hit the reader. Isaiah was named the man who foretold that this sanctuary would be raised in Egypt by a Jew, so it was the temple came to be rebuilt. Hang on one second. I'm going to scroll back to give people that heard this a chance to see the page and look at what I read. So we're going to go back just a couple of pages here. So I think, what was it? We started 391. Wait, does this seem right? No, read that before. Here, I think we were here, right? So this page here is 392. We're going to take a look at 392. You can pause it as you go. This gives you a chance to look at every section of the page. All right, here's 393. Sorry, guys, this is important. This is about backing up every word that I am reading that isn't my own thoughts and showing you that I am reading it faithfully, pronouncing it faithfully as best I can. All right. And now we're back to here. On receipt of this dispatch, Lupus proceeded to the temple, brought out some of the offerings, and shut up the building. Soon afterwards, Lupus died, and Paulinus, the new governor, stripped the temple bar, threatening the priests with dire consequences if they did not produce every single offering. He then forbade would-be worshippers to come near the precincts, and locking the gates, put the place entirely out of bounds, leaving not a vestige of divine worship there. The time from the building of the sanctuary to its closure was 343 years. Hang on. Let's see what the annotation says at the bottom. 100 years too many. Perhaps a deliberate invention, since 343 is the cube of 7. So der Eisler. Or so Dr. Eisler. I don't know what that's short for. All right. Interesting. So 343 is the cube of 7. So he's accusing him of maybe doing a little bit of gematria. The town in the neighborhood of Cyrene was also infected by the mad folly of Sicarii. Into Cyrene slipped an unprincipled scoundrel called Jonathan. Remember, these are Jews. Like, Jonathan is not like a Hebrew name, right? They had a lot of people that were Romanizing, or were Romanized and then perhaps regretted it or something. By trade, a weaver who persuaded a number of men. Well, they were, they look, broken language influenced by the Greeks also prior to this. Just, yeah, this is the Jews. Anyway, men of poor classes to listen to him, and led them out into the desert, promising to show them signs and portents. Few of the citizens were aware of his fraudulent activities. He was a charlatan. But the leading Jews in Cyrene reported his exodus with all his paraphernalia to the governor of Libyan Pentapolis, Catullus, who promptly dispatched contingents of horse and foot. They easily crushed an unarmed mob, destroying the majority in the engagement. The few who were taken alive were brought before Catullus. The ringleader, Jonathan, escaped for the moment, but a long and very careful search of the whole country led to his ultimate capture. Brought before the governor, he contrived to save his own skin, but gave Catullus a pretext for shocking injustice. Against the wealthiest of the Jews, he brought the monstrous charge that they had given him his instructions, and Catullus, welcoming these charges, had given him his instructions. And Catullus, with delight, grossly exaggerated the significance of what happened, dramatizing it with a vengeance in order that he too might be credited with a victory over the Jews. But what was crueler still, of men of poor... Okay, I thought that was the I thought it skipped... Okay. But what was crueler still, besides being absurdly credulous, he even gave the Sicarii lessons in the art of lying. Thus he ordered Jonathan to name one of the Jews, Alexander, of whom he had fallen foul some time before, the resulting quarrel being public knowledge, involving also his wife, Berenice, in the allegations. Having got rid of these, he next murdered all the wealthier Jews to the number of 3,000. In doing this, he felt quite safe, as he confiscated their possessions for the benefit of Caesar's revenues. All right. For fear that some of the Jews elsewhere might show up his iniquitous conduct, he increased the scope of his calumnies, inviting Jonathan and some of his fellow prisoners to prefer a charge of subversive activities against the most respectable Jews in both Alexandria and Rome. One of the objects of this trumped-up charge was Josephus, the writer of this history. So he's talking about himself and not the other Josephus, I would assume. However, Catullus did not profit as he had expected from his fabrication. He arrived in Rome, bringing Jonathan and his associates in fetters, and satisfied that the lies told in his presence and at his prompting would be accepted without question. But Vespasian smelt a rat and inquired into the facts, and finding no justification for the accusation brought against the men, acquitted them of the charges at the instance of Titus, and gave Jonathan the punishment he deserved. He was first tortured, then burnt alive. Catullus, for the time being, profited by the lenience of the two emperors and received no more than a reprimand. But soon afterwards, he succumbed to a complicated sickness beyond remedy and died miserably, not only chastened in body, but suffering from a much more terrible disease of the mind. He was tormented by terrors, constantly calling out, that he saw the ghosts of those who had murdered those he had murdered standing before him and losing control of himself. He would spring from his bed as if he himself was being tortured and burnt. His malady grew rapidly worse and worse, and his bowels were eaten through and fell out. Such was his end. Proof, if ever there was one, of the providence of God, who executes judgment on the wicked. And here we bring our story to an end. The story which we promised to set down with the utmost accuracy for the benefit of those who wish to learn how the Romans fought this war against the Jews. Its literary merits must be left to the judgment of the readers. As to its truth, I should not hesitate to declare without fear of contradiction that from first word to last, I have aims at nothing else. He has aims of the truth. He's not saying that it is, but he's aiming for it. So, the Slavonic editions is, I think, about 4 pages. But I'm done. We will read these 4 pages next. We're going to read this information as basically a bonus. We're gonna do a shorty next time. I'll find time to do a shorty, and we'll do a one shot. Read those 4 pages. Maybe it'll open up some interesting questions. All right. So thanks everybody. Some of you may have been listening quietly. I think for the most part, I had a peak quite a while ago. I'm not crazy. My audio's been working. Maybe it'll open. Yeah, okay, good. All right. So that's good. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm tired. I will see you tomorrow afternoon for Greyhorn Pagan's room readings. Have a good night.